What happens when a young Comanche warrior, caught between two worlds, chooses to risk everything for two sisters he was never meant to protect? The decisions made in the heat of danger will forever alter their destinies. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The hot summer sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas plains as Swifthawk rode his painted horse along the dusty trail. At 22 years of age, he was already a respected warrior among his Comanche tribe, though he often found himself caught between two worlds. His mother had been Comanche, his father a white trader who had lived among the tribe for years before being killed in a skirmish with settlers. Swifthawk slowed his horse as he approached the ridge overlooking Miller's Creek. Something wasn't right. The small homestead that belonged to the Anderson family stood quiet, too quiet for midday. No smoke rose from the chimney. No sounds of work or children playing reached his ears. The Andersons had always been fair to his people, trading honestly and respecting boundaries when many others did not. He dismounted, tethering his horse to a scrub oak before making his way down the slope. His moccasined feet moved silently through the tall grass as he approached the cabin. That's when he heard it, a soft, muffled crying coming from the barn. Drawing his knife, Swifthawk moved cautiously toward the sound. Inside the dim interior of the barn, he found two girls huddled in the corner of an empty stall. The older one, Sarah, was about 20. Her blonde hair matted with dirt and tears streaming down her face as she clutched her 9-year-old sister Emma protectively. "Swifthawk!" Sarah gasped, recognition and relief flooding her face. "Thank God it's you." "What happened here?" he asked, his English carrying a slight accent as he knelt beside them. "Where are your parents?" Sarah's voice trembled. "Raiders came, 6 men. Pa and Ma were in the field. They shot Pa, took Ma. We ran and hid here." She fought to control her breathing. "They said they'd be back, looking for us, and for Pa's gold." Swifthawk frowned. "Gold?" "Pa was saving to buy more land," Sarah explained. Everyone knew he kept gold coins, but not where. Her eyes darted nervously to the barn door. "They've been gone for hours, but they promised to return by nightfall." Little Emma looked up at him with frightened eyes. "Are you going to help us, Mr. Hawk?" The question hung in the air as Swifthawk weighed his options. Helping white settlers could bring trouble to his people, especially if the raiders were white men themselves. The peace between his tribe and the settlers was fragile at best. "Yes," he finally said, "I will help you." He had known the Anderson family for years. Thomas Anderson had treated him with respect, had even defended him once in town when drunken cowboys had tried to provoke a fight. "We need to leave now," Swifthawk continued. "The raiders will return. Do you have family nearby?" Sarah nodded. "Our uncle's place is 2 days' ride north near Fort Richardson." Swifthawk considered this. "Too far on foot. We need horses." "They took all of ours," Sarah said, despair edging into her voice. He made a quick decision. "I will return to my camp for another horse. You gather only what you need, food, water, blankets, nothing more." Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears and standing up with new determination. "We'll be ready. But Swifthawk, what about Ma and Pa's body?" The young Comanche warrior's expression darkened. "First, we get you safe. Then we will find help for your mother." He didn't mention that her mother had likely already met the same fate as her father, but Sarah seemed to understand from the grim set of his jaw. "Emma, come help me pack," Sarah said, taking her sister's hand. Swifthawk left them preparing and raced back to his horse. As he rode hard toward his tribe's encampment, his thoughts were troubled. Chief Stone Bear would not approve of him risking himself for white settlers, but Swifthawk couldn't abandon the girls. He had lived in both worlds enough to know that innocent lives deserved protection, regardless of skin color. The sun was lowering in the sky when Swifthawk returned with a second horse. Sarah had packed efficiently, just one small bundle of necessities. Emma's eyes were red from crying, but she had a determined look on her small face. "We need to hurry," Swifthawk said, helping them mount. "Stay close to me and be quiet." They rode away from the homestead, keeping to the tree line and ravines to avoid being spotted on the open plains. Swifthawk led them on a circuitous route, sometimes doubling back to ensure they weren't being followed. The shadows grew longer as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "Swifthawk," Sarah asked quietly as they paused to water the horses at a small creek, Why are you helping us? Your people and ours. They don't always get along. The young warrior was silent for a moment before responding. My father was a white man. My mother, Comanche. I live between both worlds. I judge people by their actions, not their blood. He looked directly at her. Your father was a good man. He spoke straight words, traded fairly. This is what matters. Emma approached him shyly, offering him a piece of cornbread from their supplies. Pa always said you were different from the other Indians. He said you had a good heart. Swift Hawk accepted the bread with a nod of thanks, touched by the gesture and the words. As night fell, he found them a sheltered spot between large boulders to make camp. They couldn't risk a fire, so they ate cold provisions and wrapped themselves in blankets against the cooling desert air. Rest now, Swift Hawk told them. I will keep watch. Tomorrow, we continue north. As Sarah and Emma fell into an exhausted sleep, Swift Hawk sat vigilant, his back against a boulder, watching the moonlit landscape. He knew the danger was far from over. Raiders in this territory were relentless, and if they discovered their intended victims had escaped, they would hunt them down rather than leave witnesses. The night wind carried distant coyote calls and the rustling of scrub brush. Swift Hawk closed his eyes briefly, sending a silent prayer to the spirits to watch over them on this perilous journey. His decision to help these girls might have sealed his own fate, but as he looked at their sleeping forms, he knew he couldn't have chosen differently. Dawn broke with streaks of crimson across the eastern sky, as Swift Hawk gently roused Sarah and Emma from their fitful sleep. They had to move quickly, covering as much ground as possible before the heat of the day made travel more difficult. Did you sleep at all? Sarah asked, noticing the tired lines around Swift Hawk's eyes. I rested enough, he replied, though in truth he had remained alert throughout the night, startling at every unfamiliar sound. We should eat something quickly and then ride. As they shared dried beef and the last of the cornbread, Swift Hawk explained his plan. We will follow Medicine Creek north. It runs through a canyon where we can stay hidden. The journey will take longer this way, but it is safer. Sarah nodded, helping Emma tie her hair back and brush dust from her clothes. How well do you know these lands? I have hunted here since I was a boy, Swift Hawk answered, checking the horses. My people move with the seasons, following the buffalo. I know every hill and water source between here and the fort. They mounted and set off, the morning air still cool enough to make the ride pleasant. Swift Hawk led them through a landscape of rugged beauty, red rock formations rising dramatically from the plains, deep arroyos carved by ancient floods, and sparse vegetation that somehow thrived in the harsh conditions. By midday, they had reached the entrance to the canyon Swift Hawk had mentioned. Steep walls rose on either side of a narrow creek that gurgled over smooth stones. The shade provided welcome relief from the sun, and the sounds of water and birdsong created an atmosphere of tranquility that belied their desperate circumstances. We'll rest the horses here, Swift Hawk decided, dismounting near a pool of clear water. While the girls refreshed themselves, Swift Hawk climbed partway up the canyon wall to scan their back trail. He saw no sign of pursuit, but something kept his senses on edge. Years of hunting and being hunted had taught him to trust his instincts. When he returned to the creek, he found Sarah attempting to wash blood from Emma's dress, a grim reminder of what they had witnessed. She keeps seeing it, Sarah explained quietly, nodding toward her sister who sat on a rock staring vacantly at the flowing water. Pa falling. The blood. She barely speaks now. Swift Hawk approached Emma carefully and sat beside her. When I was younger than you, he began softly, I saw bad things too. My father was killed by men who hated him for living with my people. Emma looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with tears. Does it ever go away? The pictures in your head? Swift Hawk considered his answer carefully. The pictures, they fade like tracks after rain, but we keep the memory of those we love inside us, like a flame that never goes out. He pointed to his chest. Your father is here now. His strength becomes your strength. A single tear rolled down Emma's cheek, but she straightened her shoulders slightly. Pa was very strong. Yes, Swift Hawk agreed. And now you must be strong too. For your sister. For your mother, when we find her. Sarah watched this exchange with gratitude, seeing a gentleness in the young Comanche warrior that contrasted with his fierce appearance. His long black hair was tied back with a leather thong, and his copper skin bore the faint scars of battles past. Yet his dark eyes held compassion when he spoke to Emma. They continued their journey through the canyon, the walls gradually lowering as they progressed northward. By late afternoon, they emerged onto rolling grasslands that stretched to the horizon. "We should reach Cottonwood Creek by nightfall," Swifthawk told them. "There is a good place to camp there, hidden by trees." As they rode, Sarah moved her horse alongside Swifthawk's. "Tell me honestly," she said in a low voice so Emma couldn't hear. "Do you think my mother could still be alive?" Swifthawk met her gaze. "It is possible. The raiders may keep her alive to lead them to the gold, if they believe she knows where it is hidden. And if they find out she doesn't know?" He didn't answer, but his silence told Sarah everything. She blinked back tears and nodded grimly. "If we reach Fort Richardson," she continued after a moment, "will you stay with us to help explain what happened?" Swifthawk's expression tightened. "Forts are not safe places for my people, even those who come in peace." "But you're helping us," Sarah protested. "Surely they would—" "Many white men see only the color of skin, the way of dress," he interrupted. "They do not look deeper. To them, I am just another savage." Sarah fell silent, understanding the truth of his words. She had seen the way some townspeople treated Indians, even peaceful ones who came to trade. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "It's not right." Swifthawk shrugged slightly. "It is the way of things. But not all white men think this way. Your father did not." Their conversation was cut short by a distant sound that made Swifthawk rein his horse to a sudden stop. He held up his hand for silence, listening intently. "Riders," he said after a moment, "coming fast from the south." Sarah's face paled. "The raiders? Maybe." Swifthawk scanned the terrain quickly. "There is no place to hide here. We must ride hard for the creek." They spurred their horses into a gallop, racing across the open grassland toward the line of trees visible on the horizon. Emma clung desperately to her saddle, her small form bouncing with each stride of her mount. The sound of pursuit grew louder behind them. Swifthawk glanced back to see a cloud of dust rising in the distance. 5 or 6 riders moving fast. "They've seen us," he called to Sarah. "When we reach the trees, follow the creek east. Do not stop unless I tell you." Sarah nodded, fear and determination warring in her expression as she reached across to steady Emma. The trees grew larger as they approached, promising shelter and a chance to evade their pursuers. Just as they plunged into the welcoming shade of the cottonwoods, a sharp crack split the air. Sarah's horse screamed and stumbled, throwing her forward. Swifthawk wheeled his mount around in time to see her crash to the ground, the horse collapsing beside her with blood pumping from its chest. "Sarah!" Emma cried out, struggling to control her own frightened horse. Swifthawk acted instantly, leaping from his horse and rushing to Sarah. She was conscious but dazed, blood seeping from a gash on her forehead. "Can you stand?" he asked urgently, helping her to her feet. "I think so," she mumbled, swaying slightly. Another shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree trunk inches from their heads. Swifthawk pulled Sarah toward his horse. "Both of you must ride," he said, lifting her onto his mount behind Emma. "Follow the creek. There is a waterfall ahead with caves behind it. Hide there and wait for me." "What about you?" Sarah asked, clutching the saddle horn for balance. Swifthawk drew his knife and the small pistol he kept hidden in his buckskin shirt, a relic from his father. "I will lead them away from you." "No!" Sarah protested. "They'll kill you." "Go now!" Swifthawk slapped the horse's flank, sending it forward along the creek bank with both girls clinging to its back. Drawing a deep breath, Swifthawk turned to face the approaching riders. He knew the odds were against him, but if he could buy the Anderson sisters enough time to reach safety, perhaps his sacrifice would be worthwhile. The thunder of hooves grew louder as he moved deeper into the trees, preparing to make his stand. Swifthawk positioned himself behind a massive cottonwood trunk, breathing steadily to calm his racing heart. The raiders' voices carried through the trees, growing louder as they approached his position. "Spread out," a gruff voice commanded. "The engine and the girls can't have gone far." Swifthawk recognized the strategic advantage of his position. The creek bank provided natural cover, and the dense undergrowth would force the riders to dismount if they wanted to pursue effectively. He had grown up in these woods, learning to move silently and strike with precision. These men, for all their brutality, were strangers to this particular landscape. The first raider appeared, a bearded man with a filthy bandana around his neck. He was leading his horse carefully through the trees, rifle at the ready. Swift Hawk waited until the man had passed his hiding spot before emerging silently behind him. With one swift movement, he clamped his hand over the man's mouth and pulled him backward, disarming him before the raider could raise an alarm. "How many of you?" Swift Hawk hissed in the terrified man's ear, pressing his knife against his throat. "6, the raider stammered. "Please don't kill me." "I ain't never killed nobody, I swear." Swift Hawk didn't believe him for a second. "Where is the woman you took, the mother?" The man's eyes darted nervously. "Barn, back at the homestead. Jed's watching her." So Mrs. Anderson was still alive. Swift Hawk felt a surge of hope, but he knew rescuing her would be even more difficult now. First, he had to ensure Sarah and Emma's safety. "Call your friends," Swift Hawk ordered. "Tell them you found tracks heading west." When the man hesitated, Swift Hawk pressed the blade harder. "Do it now or die quietly." "Hey boys," the raider called out, his voice shaking. "Found fresh tracks over here. They're heading toward the river." Shouts of acknowledgement echoed through the trees, followed by the sounds of horses being turned westward. Swift Hawk waited until the noise faded, then struck the raider hard with the butt of his own pistol, knocking him unconscious. He bound the man with strips of his own shirt and left him hidden in the underbrush. Moving carefully through the woods, Swift Hawk made his way eastward along the creek. The sound of rushing water grew louder, signaling the approach of the waterfall he'd mentioned to Sarah. He hoped the girls had found the caves and remained hidden. As he rounded a bend in the creek, the waterfall came into view, a 20-foot cascade of water tumbling over moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. Behind the curtain of water, a series of shallow caves offered perfect hiding places. "Sarah, Emma," he called softly, approaching the falls. For a heart-stopping moment, there was no response. Then Sarah's face appeared at the edge of the cascading water. "Swift Hawk, you're alive!" Relief flooded her features. He climbed carefully over the slippery rocks and ducked behind the waterfall. Inside the largest cave, he found Emma huddled on a dry patch of stone, her knees drawn up to her chest. "Are you both unharmed?" he asked, kneeling to check Sarah's head wound, which had stopped bleeding. "We're fine," Sarah assured him. "What happened? We heard shouting." Swift Hawk quickly explained his encounter with the raider and the news about their mother. Sarah's eyes widened with hope. "Ma's alive? We have to go back for her." "We will," Swift Hawk promised. "But we must be careful. These men are dangerous and they still outnumber us." Emma spoke up for the first time since their flight. "Is she hurt? Did they hurt Ma?" Swift Hawk exchanged a glance with Sarah, both understanding the need to protect the child from harsh truths. "Your mother is strong," he told Emma, "like you and your sister. We will find her and bring her to safety." As they rested in the cave, Swift Hawk outlined his plan. They would continue north toward Fort Richardson but take a detour to a Comanche camp he knew was nearby. There he could gather warriors willing to help rescue Mrs. Anderson. "My people have no love for raiders who disturb the peace," he explained. "Chief Stone Bear is wise. He will understand that helping you serves all our interests." Sarah looked doubtful. "Will your chief really risk his warriors to help white settlers?" "He might not," Swift Hawk admitted. "But there are young warriors who will follow me, especially when they learn the raiders murdered a peaceful man and took his wife." They decided to wait until nightfall before continuing their journey. The raiders would be searching the western approach to the river, giving them an opportunity to slip away eastward. As darkness fell, they emerged from behind the waterfall. The night was clear, stars glittering overhead like scattered diamond dust on a blanket of black velvet. Swift Hawk helped the girls mount his horse while he walked alongside, leading them through terrain too dangerous to navigate while riding in the dark. "How far is your tribe's camp?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed in the stillness of the night. "Half a day's journey northeast," Swift Hawk replied. "We should reach it by midday tomorrow if we travel steadily." Emma had fallen asleep against her sister's back, exhaustion finally overcoming her fear. Sarah adjusted her carefully so she wouldn't fall. "Swift Hawk," Sarah said after they had walked in silence for some time. "Why did you really come to our homestead yesterday? Was it just chance?" He was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke. "I came to warn your father. There have been raids on other homesteads. My scouts reported strange riders watching your land." He sighed heavily. "I was too late. You couldn't have known," Sarah said gently. "And if you hadn't come when you did, Emma and I would be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Swifthawk nodded grimly, understanding what had been left unsaid. "Your father once showed me kindness when others would not. When I was 16, I came to town with my mother to trade. Some men, drunk on whiskey, decided to amuse themselves by tormenting us. Your father stepped between us and them. He risked much that day." "That sounds like Pa," Sarah said, a sad smile crossing her face. "He always said a man should stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." "A wise teaching," Swifthawk agreed. "My father said similar words before he died." They continued through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and allow Emma to walk for short periods when she woke. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, the landscape gradually changing from open plains to more rugged terrain, with scattered pine trees and rocky outcroppings. As the sun climbed higher, Swifthawk grew more alert, scanning their surroundings constantly. They were approaching Comanche territory, and he knew patrols would be watching the borders vigilantly. "Stay close to me," he instructed Sarah. "If we encounter warriors, let me speak first. Do not show fear." Sure enough, as they crested a small hill overlooking a verdant valley, 2 mounted Comanche warriors appeared as if from nowhere, blocking their path. Their faces were painted for war, lances held at the ready. Swifthawk raised his hand in a gesture of peace and spoke rapidly in his native tongue. The warriors' expressions remained impassive as they listened. When he finished, they exchanged glances before the older of the 2 nodded curtly. "They will escort us to the camp," Swifthawk explained to Sarah. "I told them what happened, and that we seek the chief's counsel." The Comanche camp came into view as they descended into the valley. Dozens of teepees arranged in a semicircle, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing, and women working on various tasks. Activity slowed as the strange procession entered the camp, curious eyes following the white girls on horseback. Chief Stone Bear emerged from the largest teepee, his weathered face impassive as he observed their arrival. He was an imposing figure, well into his 60s but still straight-backed and strong, with gray streaks in his long black hair and deep lines etched around his eyes that spoke of wisdom earned through hardship. Swifthawk dismounted and approached his chief with proper respect, again speaking in Comanche. The chief listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Sarah and Emma. When Swifthawk finished, Stone Bear remained silent for a long moment before responding. "The chief wishes to hear your story," Swifthawk translated, turning to Sarah. "Speak truthfully and show respect." Sarah slid carefully from the horse, helping Emma down before approaching the chief. Though terrified, she straightened her shoulders and met Stone Bear's penetrating gaze directly. "Thank you for allowing us into your camp, Chief Stone Bear," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "My sister and I have lost our father to murderers. Our mother has been taken. Swifthawk saved our lives at great risk to his own. We ask for your help in rescuing our mother and finding justice for our father." As Swifthawk translated her words, she saw something shift in the chief's expression, a subtle softening around the eyes, perhaps recognition of her courage despite her fear. Stone Bear spoke at length, gesturing occasionally towards Swifthawk and the surrounding camp. When he finished, Swifthawk turned to Sarah with a hint of relief in his expression. "The chief says you may stay in the camp tonight. Tomorrow, he will call a council to decide whether to help rescue your mother. Until then, you will be given food and a place to rest." Sarah bowed her head in gratitude. "Please, tell him thank you." As they were led to a small teepee at the edge of the camp, Sarah whispered to Swifthawk, "Will he help us?" Swifthawk's expression was guarded. "Stone Bear is wise. He knows that what happens to your mother could affect relations between our peoples for years to come." He glanced toward the setting sun. "Rest now. Tomorrow will decide many fates. Your mother's yours, and mine." The council fire burned bright against the pre-dawn sky, as the Comanche warriors gathered in a semicircle, their faces solemn in the flickering light. Chief Stone Bear sat cross-legged at the head of the assembly, his weathered hands resting on his knees, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Swift Hawk stood before the council, his back straight and proud as he addressed his people in their native tongue. Sarah and Emma watched from a respectful distance, unable to understand the words but recognizing the passion in his voice. "He is speaking of honor," a soft voice explained beside Sarah. She turned to find an elderly Comanche woman who had been kind to them the previous evening. "He tells of your father's good heart, of the raiders' evil, of the balance that must be restored." "You speak English well," Sarah remarked, surprised. The old woman nodded. "My husband was a scout for the Bluecoats many years ago. I learned their tongue." She gestured toward the council. "Listen now. Others speak." Several warriors rose in turn, some arguing heatedly against involving themselves in white men's troubles, others supporting Swift Hawk's position. The debate continued as the sky lightened with approaching dawn. Finally, Chief Stone Bear raised his hand for silence. He spoke at length, his deep voice carrying authority that commanded respect from even the most vocal dissenters. When he finished, many of the warriors nodded in agreement. Swift Hawk approached Sarah and Emma, his expression cautiously optimistic. "The chief has decided. 10 warriors will ride with me to rescue your mother and seek justice for your father's murder." Relief washed over Sarah. "Thank God. Please thank the chief for us." "There is a condition," Swift Hawk continued. "You and Emma must remain here in the camp. It is too dangerous for you to come." Sarah began to protest, but Swift Hawk shook his head firmly. "This is not negotiable. The raiders would use you against us if they could. Here, you will be safe." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. She understood the wisdom of his decision, even as her heart ached to be part of the rescue. The warriors prepared swiftly, gathering weapons and supplies. Swift Hawk showed remarkable leadership as he organized the small war party, assigning roles and discussing strategy with the more experienced warriors. Before mounting his horse, Swift Hawk returned to where Sarah and Emma waited anxiously. He carried a small leather pouch which he handed to Sarah. "If we do not return in 3 days," he said gravely, "give this to the old woman, Morning Star. She will guide you safely to Fort Richardson." Sarah clutched the pouch, understanding its significance. "You will return," she said with more conviction than she felt. "With our mother." Emma stepped forward suddenly and hugged Swift Hawk around the waist. "Be careful," she whispered. "Please bring Ma back." Momentarily startled by the child's embrace, Swift Hawk gently placed his hand on her head. "I will do everything in my power, little one." The war party rode out as the sun crested the eastern hills, their silhouettes merging with the golden light that bathed the landscape. Sarah and Emma watched until they disappeared from sight, their hearts filled with hope and dread in equal measure. The day passed slowly for the sisters. The Comanche women included them in their daily activities, grinding corn, tending fires, repairing clothing, offering quiet companionship that transcended the language barrier. Emma, resilient as children often are, soon found herself playing with Comanche children who were initially shy, but quickly warmed to the novelty of a white playmate. Sarah watched her sister's laughter with profound gratitude, recognizing how precious such moments were after the horrors they had witnessed. Night fell with no word from Swift Hawk and his warriors. Sarah slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by images of her father's death and her mother's captivity. When dawn broke again, she rose early, scanning the horizon for any sign of returning riders. Morning Star found her there, offering a cup of hot herbal tea. "Watching will not bring them faster," the old woman said gently. "Come, we will make medicine bags for the warriors' safe return." The second day passed much like the first. Emma had begun learning Comanche words from her new friends, delighting in her ability to communicate in this new language. Sarah threw herself into whatever tasks the women assigned her, grateful for the distraction from her anxious thoughts. By the third morning, Sarah's hope began to fade. She clutched Swift Hawk's leather pouch, dreading the possibility of having to use it. Emma sensed her sister's despair and stayed close, her small hand often finding Sarah's as if to offer comfort. "They should have returned by now," Sarah murmured to Morning Star as they collected firewood together. The old woman's face remained impassive. "The journey is long, the task difficult. Have faith in Swift Hawk's skill." Late in the afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a cry went up from the camp's perimeter. Sarah dropped the basket she was carrying and ran toward the commotion, her heart hammering in her chest. Riders were approaching. More than had left with Swift Hawk. As they drew closer, Sarah strained to make out familiar figures among the dust-covered warriors. Then she saw him, Swift Hawk riding at the head of the party, his posture weary but unbowed. And beside him on a horse of her own rode her mother. Sarah fell to her knees, tears of joy streaming down her face. Emma raced past her, squealing with excitement. "Ma! Ma!" The riders entered the camp to a hero's welcome. Mrs. Anderson was helped from her horse, her face bruised and her clothes torn, but very much alive. She gathered her daughters in her arms, all three weeping with the joy of reunion. Swift Hawk dismounted slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. Sarah noticed a crude bandage around his upper arm, stained with blood. "You're hurt," she said, approaching him after embracing her mother. He shrugged. A small price. His eyes moved to Mrs. Anderson, who was being tended by the Comanche women. "Your mother is strong. She endured much, but never lost hope that you were safe." "What happened to the raiders?" Sarah asked. "Justice," Swift Hawk replied simply. "They will harm no other families." That evening, as the camp celebrated the warriors' successful return, Thomas Anderson's widow recounted the raid and her rescue. The raiders had kept her alive, believing she knew the location of her husband's gold. They had planned to use Sarah and Emma as leverage to make her reveal the hiding place. "When Swift Hawk and his warriors attacked, I thought they were more raiders at first," Mrs. Anderson explained. "Then I heard him call my name, and I knew God had answered my prayers." The battle had been fierce but brief. Surprised and outgunned, the raiders had fallen quickly to the skilled Comanche warriors. Swift Hawk himself had faced the leader, the man responsible for Thomas Anderson's death, in single combat. "He fought with the spirit of 10 men, one of the warriors declared, slapping Swift Hawk on the shoulder with respect. Chief Stonebear approached the Anderson family, speaking through Swift Hawk as translator. "The blood debt is paid. Your husband's spirit can rest in peace now." Mrs. Anderson bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you for sending your warriors. My daughters and I owe you our lives." The chief nodded solemnly. "It is Swift Hawk who earned this victory. His courage honors our people." The following morning, preparations began for the Andersons' journey to Fort Richardson. Chief Stonebear provided horses and supplies, along with 2 warriors who would escort them safely to their destination. As they prepared to depart, Sarah sought out Swift Hawk, who was having his wound properly dressed by Morning Star. "Will you come with us to the fort?" she asked, though she already suspected his answer. He shook his head. "My place is here, with my people. The fort is not welcoming to me." "What will you do now?" Swift Hawk looked toward the distant mountains. "Continue to live between 2 worlds. Perhaps someday those worlds will find peace with each other." Sarah impulsively took his hand. "My family will never forget what you've done for us. You'll always have friends among the white settlers, Swift Hawk." He smiled slightly. "Perhaps that is a beginning." Mrs. Anderson approached, leading Emma by the hand. "We're ready to leave, Sarah." She turned to Swift Hawk, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Young man, I don't have words enough to thank you." "No thanks are needed," Swift Hawk replied. "Your husband showed me kindness once. I have repaid that debt. Some debts can never be fully repaid," Mrs. Anderson said softly. "But I want you to know that our home will always be open to you. When we rebuild, you'll have a place at our table whenever you wish." This simple offer, the extension of friendship and trust, seemed to affect Swift Hawk more deeply than any formal gratitude could have. He bowed his head briefly, then straightened with quiet dignity. "I would be honored," he said. As the Anderson family rode away from the Comanche camp, Sarah looked back one last time. Swift Hawk stood watching their departure, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. He raised his hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture, knowing that while their paths were diverging now, the connection forged through danger and courage would endure. 2 weeks later, at Fort Richardson, Lieutenant Colonel Mackenzie listened to Mrs. Anderson's account of their ordeal and rescue with growing interest. "So this young Comanche risked his life to save you and your daughters?" he asked, somewhat incredulously. "Yes, sir," Mrs. Anderson affirmed. "Without Swift Hawk, we would not be alive today." The colonel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "This could be significant. We've been trying to establish better relations with the peaceful Comanche bands. He made a note in his ledger. I'd like to extend an official commendation to this young man, perhaps even arrange a meeting. When word of this reached the Comanche camp, Chief Stone Bear regarded it with cautious optimism. Perhaps, he told Swift Hawk, you were meant to be a bridge between our peoples. Swift Hawk, standing on the ridge overlooking the plains where both Comanche and settler alike now lived, considered his unique position with new purpose. Born of two worlds, he had always felt caught between them. Now perhaps that very position offered an opportunity to help both. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, a land of both great beauty and great conflict. But as Swift Hawk watched a group of riders approaching from the direction of Fort Richardson, recognizing Sarah's blonde hair among them, he allowed himself to hope that a different future might be possible. A future where courage and honor were valued above the color of one's skin or the language of one's birth. As he mounted his horse to ride down and meet the visitors, Swift Hawk carried with him the wisdom of his Comanche ancestors and the open-mindedness his white father had taught him. In saving the Anderson family, he had perhaps taken the first step toward saving something much larger, the possibility of peace in a divided land.